Devean Deal and the TCU pass rush will be the key for the Frogs defense in 2025.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Stephen Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 seasons. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. If you need tickets for your next sporting event, comedy show, whatever the case is, check out the Gametime app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. TCU Hoops, they fall to Houston today. We'll talk about that in segment 3. Mike Buddy was introduced as the new Frogs athletic director. He had some comments in his press conference this morning. But we start today with TCU football and where this team is going in the 2025 season. I think quietly, after that Baylor game, which defensively that Baylor game was tough, Marcus Deal was out with an injury. Hakeem Ajibalaiba went out on the first series of the ball game. And so at defensive tackle, they were in a bad place from a personnel standpoint. Baylor ran the ball really well with Bryson Washington. But honestly, they competed in the first half of the game. The second half, though, you started to see that run game really get going. Sawyer Robertson made plays as well, and Baylor ended up winning by a field goal. But if you take that game out of it, which I know you can't always do that, in the second half of this football season, really starting with the Utah game, they give up 7 points to Utah on the road. 30 to Houston, that was bad. But, they rebound with a performance against Oklahoma State where they gave up 13 points. Arizona had 28, but that's a little bit skewed because there was a scoop and score at the end of that ball game. And a lot of those points came sort of in garbage time or when TCU had a big lead. So they made stops when they needed to. And then against Cincinnati in the snow, they won that game 20-13. And I think we saw flashes and pieces of what Andy Avalos wants to do defensively. We talked about it before the season started. He needs guys that can rush the passer. He wants to run – hybrid defense is kind of a cliche term now because I feel like everybody's running some sort of hybrid personnel package defensively, or a large majority of college football is, to try to match up as well as they can with all the different variations and spread concepts that offenses are throwing at them. A lot of man-to-man coverage in the secondary, a lot of different looks, blitzes, faking those pressures, dropping guys from different angles, sending guys from different angles, and ultimately trying to create one-on-one matchups for your pass rushers. And going into the year, we didn't really have a great feel for who those pass rushers were going to be. Devean Deal comes over from Tulane, Cooper McDonald from San Diego State. You had some, defensive ends. Paul Olawale going into the season looked like he was going to be a guy, but that didn't work out because of an injury. But Devean Deal emerged as the most consistent guy at stud linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle. He became the most consistent player that got after the quarterback on a week-to-week basis. Cooper McDonald was sidelined with an injury for a few weeks. Deal stepped up in his place. And honestly, that Utah game, I talked about that kind of being a light bulb moment for the defense in general. I'm not saying it's a light bulb moment for him because I thought he played really well all year long. But that was when you started to see him take over even more and become a dominant presence. He was a defensive MVP of the New Mexico Bowl win. He ended the season with 5.5 sacks. And it wasn't like, sometimes you'll have a guy with 6 or 7 sacks, and it's like, oh, well, he picked up 3 in one game against the FCS team and 2 against the bad Big 12 team, and so that's a little skewed. Devean was super consistent all year long. He did have 2 sacks against Utah in that game against Isaac Wilson, but had a sack against Baylor, had a sack against Texas Tech, half a sack against Stanford, sack against Louisiana in that bowl game, and he was constantly pressuring the quarterback, making plays, and making his presence felt in the backfield. So when you look at this defense next season, you have the injuries at corner, and I feel like that stunted what they were trying to do. You had issues with your safeties and your linebackers figuring out run fits. And I think both of those things, especially the injuries in the secondary and sort of the revolving door that they had at corner, and to a certain extent safety, but more at the corner position, losing Avery Helm and Vernon Glover before the season even started, you saw flashes of what this defense could be, but you didn't really see it in its full form. Against Stanford, they got to the passer really consistently. They were pressuring the Stanford QB. And, yeah, Stanford's not a very good football team, but I remember – I've mentioned this before. I remember talking to the coach of the Long Island team before that ball game, and he was like, man, I came into this matchup thinking I was going to turn on the tape and I would be super enamored with what they were doing offensively because of Kendall Briles and all the weapons they have and just how through the years TCU's, even though Gary Patterson was the dude here for such a long time, under Sonny Dykes and even in the GP era to a certain extent, TCU has been known for having really fast and good explosive skill players who can go make plays. But the thing that stood out to him was the way that the defense just played with bad intentions. And I believe they sort of lost their confidence with some tough games against SMU and UCF, but to their credit, they started to turn it around. And with a defense that should have a better understanding, just the muscle memory of, okay, we know what these calls are now. We know what we're expected to do. We have a better feel for our responsibilities, and we've seen it in live reps. It's one thing to try to execute these things in practice and even do it against your own team, your own offense on a day-to-day basis. It's completely different when you're talking about trying to make it work within the context of the team environment and the ball game itself, where the other coaching staff's making adjustments. You're not seeing everything you thought you were going to see when it's drawn up on the whiteboard. It's different. But this defensive line, I think, is shaping up in a place where it could be the strength of this defense specifically, and maybe even this football team. Devean Deal coming back. Jonathan Bax is a super intriguing young player who this should be the year where we start to see more of him getting on the field, making plays. We said that for a while. This staff went in the portal and convinced him to stay for a reason. I think they have plans for him. Marcel Brooks moves on. You have more of a need there now for a situational pass rusher. Marcus Deal was fantastic on the interior. You bring in some reinforcements at defensive tackle. Travis Jackson was somebody who made a lot of plays and ended the season with 1.5 sacks. Paul Awale, I think it's hard to have expectations for a guy coming off an Achilles injury, but he did look really special in the moments that he played when he was healthy. Now, not this year, obviously, but the year before. And so having him back, at least from a depth perspective, will be a big force. Kelton Mickle from Jones College, who's coming in and has the size that you want. Played some defensive tackle, played some defensive end. Ansel Denbu from Washington State, originally from Aledo, played his high school ball there. But he had 6 sacks from the defensive tackle position at Wazoo last year. So he has that ability to get pressure on the quarterback. Nothing makes the back end of your defense look better than getting consistent pressure, hurrying throws, messing up the rhythm of the offense, and getting sacks. Quarterbacks do not like to get hit. Even in the dual threat world we live in now, where we see QBs take off and run all the time, if you're able to knock a QB around and get in their face and disrupt their eye level, make them throw from different arm angles, that's a surefire way to disrupt an offense. And that's what Andy Avalos' defense is built to be about. It's built to have some of those exotic blitzes, the disguises, and both in coverage and in, the pressure that you're bringing itself. We didn't really get to see it fully this past year, but I think this upcoming season, the combination of having a lot of guys coming back with experience and just having good players on the defensive line. And to me, the number one priority has to be get Devean Deal in one-on-one situations where he's coming off the edge and he's using that speed, athleticism, and strength to make things happen. Put him in scenarios where he can get to the quarterback and blow up plays. And the same thing for your interior guys, but it's going to be felt the most on the edge. Put Jonathan Bax in obvious passing situations where he can use that athleticism and that quick get off to go make plays. Another name to know, he'll be a true freshman, but Chad Woodfork. He is the prototypical size you want for an edge player at 6'5", 220, probably put some weight on him. But again, clear and obvious passing situations where it's like your job is to go make plays, he can do that. Your job is to get to the quarterback. That's something that he can understand and execute well. That's going to be the key for this TCU defense moving forward. When we come back, Mike Buddy says NIL is about to take a back seat. I'll explain what that means next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Gametime. I told you about him earlier. I'll tell a personal story. I said this yesterday in the podcast with Parker Ainsworth when we were talking about the big Monday matchup between TCU and Houston. My parents, I love them. They care about me, and they wanted to give me a Christmas present, right? They were being thoughtful. They decided, you know what? We'll get Steven tickets to this TCU Baylor game that's coming up in the middle of January, basketball game. It'll be fun. So they went through another ticketing app, and they thought they had done everything they needed to do. They gave me a card. My parents are not the most tech-savvy people in the world. So they said, you know what? We couldn't find the tickets, but we know we bought them. If you can help us find them, that'd be great. They're yours. So I start doing some investigating, and I realized something went wrong. They didn't actually get these tickets. They thought they bought them, but didn't work out. So I tell my dad, I'm like, hey, you need to talk to your bank about possibly getting a refund. In the meantime, I'll go to Gametime because what's hassle-free? The Gametime app. Download it today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Sure enough, within 5 minutes, I had tickets to that TCU Baylor game on my phone. I was able to send it to one of my friends that's going with me and say, hey, this is your ticket. Hold on to it. We'll use it here in a couple of weeks. The Gametime app is super simple. They have a picture of what your view is going to be from your seat when you sit down. There's no hidden fees. There's fees. Listen, they're trying to make a buck, obviously, but they tell you what they are up front. So there's no big surprise when you get to the checkout and you say, wait, I'm paying how much for this? Gametime, they're up front, they're honest. Check it out today. Download the Gametime app. Again, that promo code is LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Welcome to Fort Worth. New TCU Athletic Director Mike Buddy. He was introduced today. TCU's in a time of transition right now. Chancellor Boschini is stepping down. He's going through that process at the moment. But he was there at the press conference. So was Daniel Pullen, who'll be taking over for Chancellor Boschini when that transition ends up happening. And they introduced Mike Buddy, and he came up and he gave an opening remark, and then he took some questions, reiterated that he's very excited to be at TCU. Says he took a trip when he was at Wake Forest. He was in the athletics department there after he got done with pro baseball, where he played with the Yankees and the Brewers and in those minor league organizations for a few years. And him and a coworker were tasked with going around the country and just checking out different athletic departments, seeing how they were run, what they were doing, trying to come back with new and fresh ideas. And so they visited 17 different universities. And he said TCU stood out to him. He vividly remembers seeing TCU, understanding like, wow, this is a place that's doing some really cool things. It's a great community. Talked about how much he was impressed with Fort Worth in his brief time here in the past. So this was a school that he had his eye on, programs that he had his eye on. He mentioned some of the success that TCU has had. And when it got around to questions, I did an episode when this announcement came down. And I said, you know, all the resume points about Mike Buddy, a lot of them are super positive. He was a great fundraiser at both Furman, where he was an AD. He got 3 separate $1 million endowments for football and volleyball, which was a big deal there. He raised over $100 million in Army for a stadium renovation project. And that's a place where it's difficult to drum up money for athletics because they're doing a lot of other more important things, right? They're taking care of our country, protecting our freedoms, all those, training the next generation of soldiers. So athletics understandably takes a back seat in a lot of cases, but he was able to energize people and get them involved, and they had unprecedented success in football this past year, at least in the modern era. So all that's great. One concern that I had, he hasn't dealt with name, image, and likeness before, because at Army and other service academies, they're not allowed to do that. The cadets aren't allowed to take compensation for, playing in athletics. So he was asked about that directly. And the way he addressed it was he said, I don't think this is a complex problem. NIL is going to take a backseat to the new revenue share model. I'm thrilled that TCU is one of the first institutions that nationally raised their hand and said we're going to participate at the highest level. NIL fundraising is all based on relationships, trust, and being able to shape and articulate a vision. So that answer was intriguing to me. I get his point, and if things keep going down the tracks legally like they're expected to, there will be a House settlement that will be resolved in the spring that will lead to revenue sharing this upcoming summer for college athletics. And what that would mean is every athletic department, they have to raise this money themselves, but they could allocate up to $20 million to the athletic programs, not each and one individually, but that whole pot to, the entire athletic department and student athletes. And they could divvy it up how they see fit, but that would be the cap. And so you would, in a perfect world, you'd have more clear expectations, you'd have a more even playing field, and you would have scenarios where, you could give all of that to football and basketball, or you could split it up, or you can divvy it up how you see fit. But NIL is not going away. Now it's going to be different. It's going to be more in the mold of actual sponsorships with businesses instead of just collectives basically kind of having a slush fund that they're giving funds out to players to try to get them to play for their team or commit to their program. And John Denton right now, I think, is the main fundraiser for that operation. And so I don't know what that'll mean for his role, but the Flying T Club will sort of start working with TCU more in concert. And while I get that he's saying, like, hey, one part of it was he's saying, hey, that we're changing the way this is being approached. So it's not a big deal that I personally don't know a lot about. He also said another part of this is there's a lot of people at TCU that have been dealing with NIL over the past couple seasons. And so I'll just follow their lead. I'll get input from them. I'll see what they think about it. They're going to understand how to execute this on a day-to-day basis while I catch up. I just thought it was a weird answer because I don't think NIL is going away. I mean, it's going to be different, and Mike Buddy's right. Revenue sharing is going to be a huge part of it. And maybe his understanding is that's going to be my main job. Like, I got to figure that out. And NIL will be, part of the picture, but I have other people that are sort of designated to that. But it did make me curious because, right now TCU, I think, is they're doing their best with what they have. And they're trying to use a lot of the resources, it seems like, to retain players, to keep some continuity going, to keep the roster together. But another thing that Mike mentioned was he doesn't want TCU to be a place where they're just playing a game where they're chasing after guys who are looking for top dollar. And it doesn't really matter to them like what the fit is or what university they're going to end up. The only thing they care about when picking a school or program to play for is going to be how much money am I making? And like culture is important. So I'm not saying that's completely wrong. I do think TCU is going to have to find a balance. Because the bottom line is there's talent out there that, yes, they're searching for compensation. And a lot of their decision is motivated by how much is available to them. And that's like most jobs, And at this point, like, I know we love to think about and talk about the idea of amateurism and being a student athlete, but so much of this is a business now. And so I don't feel like you can just completely ignore players that are searching for the most money because there's talent out there. The other thing I would say is I was reading an article, Grace Rayner from The Athletic wrote it, and she covers recruiting. And she did like an anonymous survey at the Army or the Under Armour All-American game, which has the top high school recruits in the country. And she was asking them questions of the NIL, but one thing she asked them was about how are you handling the NIL process? And a lot of them said, well, my parents are doing it or my agent's taking care of it. And I'm kind of, they have input in it, but they're honestly just sort of stepping back and saying, you guys take care of this. So in some cases, not like the kids themselves are just this diva or this person who like is all about them. It might just be that, people around them are controlling the narrative and they're taking care of the business side of it. And so if you have a talented player who seems like a great person and they're just allowing someone else to take care of this part of the deal, I think in some cases you have to open up the checkbook and see what you can do. TCU basketball falls to Houston on Monday night. But I'm somewhat encouraged by what's happened over the past few weeks. I'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. The NFL season, the regular season, is officially over, but the playoffs are right around the corner, and there's no offseason for FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are coming up. NBA's in full swing. It's all available at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. If you make one $5 bet and you win that bet, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. One $5 bet itself gets you $200 in bonus bets. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Go to FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app. Try it out today. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. I was joking with Parker Ainsworth before I got on the show because I did a crossover episode with him yesterday. And listen, sometimes people message me or they talk to me about the podcast and they're like, I know you can't say this because you have to be positive. I don't really have to be positive. Now I will say I'm doing a daily TCU podcast. I feel like if I just got on here every day and complained about everything, that wouldn't be the most riveting content. It probably wouldn't keep people around. But I try my best to be honest about this. I'm biased. I'm not ashamed of that. I want TCU to win. That can affect my opinions at times. But I try my best to tell it like it is. And so I did not think this was going to be a win tonight. I thought TCU was really going to struggle. Tough matchup against a good Houston team. But the FanDuel line was 19.5 points. The Cougars were favored. And I was like, I think it's going to be a Houston win, but that seems a little ridiculous. Well, TCU with a backdoor cover with a bucket with 20 seconds left to make it 65-46 and stay within 20. They proved me right. Barely, but they proved me right in this ball game against Houston. But the game itself, the Houston defense is just so good, man. 19 turnovers for TCU. Noah Reynolds led the scoring with 19 points. Noah Reynolds has been good lately. He's been very assertive. The Frankie Collins injury is a huge bummer. But one thing I think it's Frankie Collins' injury / Noah getting better. One thing it's led to is he's been more aggressive. And he made some tough shots tonight. Going to the rim against a really physical Houston defense and finishing well. Trezarian White had some good moments. Vashawn Allett ended up with 11. But Frogs only had 5 players score tonight. And only 2 points off the bench. Just not a very balanced effort. And defensively, I thought they played pretty well. It was a 5-point or a 7-point game at halftime. They cut it to 3 early in the second half and went on a little bit of a run. And it looked like, okay, maybe they'll be able to hang tough for this whole game. But then things got out of hand. Things got away from them. Houston started draining some threes. TCU couldn't keep up offensively just all night long. They just could not score consistently on that side of the floor. 3 of 18 from 3, 16%, 42% from the field. So, Houston does this to a lot of people. They're only giving up 54 points a ball game. This is not shocking, but it's disappointing that TCU couldn't put on a better effort. They get BYU on Saturday at 1 o'clock at home. You're just trying to stack up as many conference wins as you can. This team is pretty limited, at least on offense at the moment. But they're playing hard. I thought they hung in there pretty well against Arizona. They obviously beat K-State. The loss to Houston here, the final score looks really bad. It was a close ball game at times. So you take some solace in that. I think they're playing better overall. But on the road in the second half of this game, just started to get away from them. And, you got to protect home floor and get back and try to get 2-2 and then go from there. But Frogs fall to Houston by 19 points, 65-46 on Monday night. We'll be back tomorrow with more coverage of TCU athletics. We'll talk some more football and more. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast.